You know, when you hit your 40s, you think you've seen enough of life to not be surprised by much. I'm Mike, by the way, 40 years old, and I thought I had it all figured out: a stable job, 2 wonderful kids, and a wife, Rachel, who I've been with for 10 years. Sure, life threw the usual curveballs, but nothing too crazy. I wasn't expecting the bombshell that was about to drop into my seemingly comfortable life. Rachel, my wife, was 3 years older than me, but that was never an issue. If anything, her maturity was something I admired. She had this way of making life seem effortless, balancing work and home like a pro. She was the breadwinner in our family, which suited me just fine since I worked from home and took care of the kids. I did most of the cooking, cleaning, and school runs while Rachel tackled the corporate world. I never felt emasculated by it. In fact, I was proud of the way we managed our lives. It wasn't the typical setup, but it worked for us. Or so I thought. Lately, though, something had shifted. Rachel, once so open and warm, had grown distant. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things: coming home late, spending more time on her phone, and being unusually secretive about her plans. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. She had been promoted last year, and with that came more responsibility, more pressure. I understood that. But it was more than just stress. There was a coldness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, like she was miles away even when she was sitting right next to me. Our sex life, once frequent and passionate, had dwindled to almost nothing. When I tried to initiate, she'd either make an excuse or, worse, go through the motions without any enthusiasm. It felt like I was being pitted rather than desired. I found myself questioning everything. Was it me? Had I let myself go? Was I not enough anymore? The doubts ate away at me, but every time I tried to bring it up, Rachel would dismiss my concerns with a wave of her hand, accusing me of being paranoid or insecure. "You're overthinking it, Mike," she'd say. "I'm just tired." Tired. That was the word she used every time I tried to talk about what was bothering her. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me rest. I started noticing other things. She'd spend hours getting ready before going out, even if it was just to run errands. Her wardrobe started changing too. She began wearing clothes I hadn't seen her buy, more revealing than usual. And then there was her phone, which seemed glued to her hand at all times. If I even glanced at it, she'd quickly lock the screen or tuck it away. One night, she said she was going out to buy some things for the house. It was odd because Rachel hated shopping. And yet, there she was, all dolled up as if she was going on a date rather than a quick trip to the store. My suspicions grew, but I stayed silent. When she got home late that night, she was evasive, brushing off my questions about where she had been and who she was with. The only detail she offered was that she had been with a friend named Mark, a name I vaguely remembered seeing in her texts. It's not like I'd ever been the jealous type. I trusted Rachel. I didn't care that she had male friends. Hell, some of my best friends were women. But something about this didn't sit right. It was the way she said his name, with an edge of familiarity that made my skin crawl. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but they kept coming back, stronger each time. A couple of weeks went by, and things didn't improve. Rachel grew more distant, more hostile even. She started picking fights over the smallest things: how I cooked dinner, the way I folded the laundry, or how I helped the kids with their homework. It was like she was looking for an excuse to be angry with me. Our house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a battlefield, and I was losing ground fast. Then came the night when everything changed. Rachel was getting ready to go out again, and I couldn't take it anymore. As she stood in front of the mirror, applying the final touches to her makeup, I noticed she was wearing the lingerie I bought her last year for our anniversary. Lingerie that, as far as I knew, she hadn't worn for me since then. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks: she was dressing up for someone else. I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I waited until she left, my mind racing with possibilities. I was desperate to know what was really going on, but I was also terrified of what I might find. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, my thoughts spiraling into darker and darker places. When she finally came home, it was late, and she looked disheveled, like she had been caught in a windstorm. I asked her where she had been, and she snapped at me, saying she didn't owe me an explanation. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the truth that I had been trying so hard to avoid became impossible to ignore. My wife was cheating on me. I could feel it in my bones. The woman I had spent the last decade of my life with, the mother of my children, was betraying me in the worst way possible. And the worst part? She didn't seem to care if I knew. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, to make her admit what she had done. But a part of me wasn't ready to face it. I needed to know more before I could take the next step, before I could rip our lives apart. So, I waited. I watched. And I planned. Because if there's one thing I've learned from years of being the guy who keeps the house running smoothly, it's that patience is a virtue. But patience also has its limits, and mine was about to snap. What was supposed to be a simple life had turned into a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the unease that had settled deep in my gut. Rachel was up early, bustling around the house with an energy that felt almost manic. She avoided eye contact, her mood swinging between forced cheerfulness and irritation at the smallest things. She was a live wire, ready to snap, and it took everything in me to stay calm, to keep my suspicions hidden. But beneath the surface, my mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that had started to show its ugly picture. I needed answers. I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine while my life crumbled around me. So, I decided to take action. That evening, after dinner, Rachel mentioned she was heading out again, another errand that would no doubt take her hours. She didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask. I simply nodded, playing the role of the oblivious husband, and watched as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and keys and followed. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't sit at home any longer, waiting for her to come back with more lies. I tailed her car from a distance, careful not to get too close. My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I navigated the streets, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. Rachel drove across town to a part of the city we rarely visited. It was an area with upscale restaurants, boutique shops, and fancy hotels, definitely not the kind of place you'd go for a quick errand. My suspicions deepened as she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel I recognized from a couple of work events. It was one of those sleek, modern places that catered to business travelers and out-of-town guests. I parked my car a block away, in a spot where I could see the hotel entrance without being seen. For what felt like an eternity, I waited, my eyes glued to the entrance. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one ticking by with agonizing slowness. Then, finally, I saw her. Rachel emerged from her car, looking more put together than I'd seen her in weeks. She was dressed to kill, in a tight dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. My heart sank as I watched her walk towards the entrance, scanning the area as if checking to make sure she wasn't being watched. She had no idea I was there, watching her every move. A few moments later, a man appeared from the hotel lobby. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded a confidence that made my skin crawl. As he stepped out into the evening light, Rachel's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She walked straight up to him, and before I could fully process what was happening, they embraced. It wasn't a friendly hug, either. It was the kind of embrace that made my blood boil, their bodies pressed close together as if they couldn't stand the distance between them. Then, to my utter disbelief, they kissed. Not a quick peck, not a friendly kiss on the cheek, this was a full-on, passionate kiss, the kind that spoke volumes about what had been going on behind my back. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I felt the blood drain from my face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, everything I knew crumbling around me in that single moment. I knew I needed proof, something solid to confront her with. So, with trembling hands, I reached for my phone and started snapping pictures. Each click of the camera felt like a stab to my heart, but I couldn't stop. I took shot after shot, capturing every sickening detail, the way she wrapped her arms around him, the way he caressed her face, the way they looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. After a few minutes that felt like a lifetime, they broke apart, their lips still inches from each other as they exchanged a few words. Then, hand in hand, they walked into the hotel, disappearing from my sight. I stayed in the car, my mind racing, my body frozen. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, was cheating on me right in front of my eyes, and she didn't even care enough to hide it properly. I don't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the hotel entrance, but eventually, I forced myself to move. My first instinct was to storm into the hotel, confront them right then and there, and demand answers. But as much as I wanted to unleash my fury, I knew that wasn't the way to handle this. I needed to be smart, to plan my next move carefully. I needed to confront Rachel, but not here, not in front of strangers where she could deny everything or make a scene. I needed to do it on my terms, where she couldn't escape the truth. So, with my heart in pieces and my stomach churning, I started the car and drove home. The drive was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mess of anger, pain, and disbelief. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before me like a tomb, cold, dark, and empty. The place that had once been a sanctuary, a home filled with love and laughter, now felt like a prison. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the photos on my phone. Each image was a dagger, a reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. I scrolled through them slowly, over and over, as if trying to convince myself that this was real, that this nightmare wasn't just a figment of my imagination. But the proof was undeniable. The pictures were clear, damning evidence that Rachel had been living a double life, hiding secrets that had shattered the foundation of our marriage. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I had to confront her, to lay it all out on the table and demand the truth. But first, I needed to prepare myself for what was to come. This wasn't going to be easy, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me: lies, excuses, maybe even tears. But I was done being played for a fool. I was done letting her walk all over me while she carried on with her affair. As I sat there, my resolve hardened. This was it. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. Tomorrow, when she came home, I would confront her with the evidence, and I wouldn't back down until I had all the answers. It was time for Rachel to face the consequences of her actions. She had betrayed me, and now she was going to pay the price. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that kiss. Rachel, my wife of 10 years, locking lips with another man like I didn't even exist. The images played over and over in my mind, each one a fresh stab of pain that made my blood boil. But the anger wasn't as overwhelming as I thought it would be. It was there, sure, simmering beneath the surface, but what I felt more than anything was a hollow emptiness, a void that had opened up inside me the moment I realized just how deep her betrayal went. When morning came, I was running on fumes. Rachel hadn't come home yet, and the house was eerily quiet. The kids were staying with my parents for the weekend, so it was just me, alone with my thoughts, waiting for her to walk through that door. I had no idea what I was going to say when she did, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to mention divorce. Not yet, anyway. As much as the thought of ending our marriage had crossed my mind, I wasn't ready to make that call. Not without hearing her side of the story, no matter how twisted or dishonest it might be. It was almost noon by the time I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the tension that had built up over the past several hours. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check as I heard the key turn in the lock and the door creak open. She walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, her expression barely registered surprise. "Mike," she said, her voice carrying a strange mix of nonchalance and exhaustion. "You're up early." I didn't respond immediately. I just watched her, taking in every detail: the smudged mascara under her eyes, the slightly disheveled hair, the way she avoided looking directly at me. She moved to put down her purse, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd even bother explaining where she'd been. But I didn't have to wait long. "I stayed with Karen last night," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I didn't want to drive home so late, and I knew the kids were with your parents, so—" Her voice trailed off, and finally, she met my gaze. I could see the flicker of something, guilt, maybe in her eyes, but she covered it quickly, masking it with a tired smile. "I'm sorry I didn't call." "You stayed with Karen?" I repeated, my tone flat, betraying nothing of the turmoil inside me. Yes, she nodded, walking over to the counter to make herself a cup of coffee. She's been having a rough time, and I figured it was better to just stay over. I watched her carefully, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. She was lying, of course she was. But the ease with which she did it, the way she slipped into that role of the caring friend, made my stomach turn. You don't smell like you've been at Karen's, I said quietly, my eyes never leaving her. Rachel froze for a split second, the coffee pot hovering just above her mug. It was a small detail, but I caught it, that brief hesitation before she continued as if nothing had happened. What do you mean? She asked, her voice light but with an edge of defensiveness. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. I mean, you smell like cheap hotel soap, not Karen's place. She turned to face me, the mug of coffee forgotten on the counter. Are you accusing me of something, Mike? Her voice had that sharp, brittle quality to it, the one she used when she felt cornered. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and slid it across the table toward her. Why don't you take a look? Rachel's eyes flicked to the phone, her brows furrowing in confusion. Slowly, she walked over, picked it up, and stared at the screen. I watched as her face drained of color, her eyes widening in horror as she swiped through the photos I had taken the night before. What the hell is this? She whispered, her voice trembling now, the bravado slipping away. You tell me, I replied, keeping my tone as steady as I could manage. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've got a lot of explaining to do. She stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, struggling to find the right words. It's not what it looks like, she finally said, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. Then what is it, Rachel? What exactly is going on here? My voice rose, unable to keep the anger at bay any longer. Because I'm tired of the lies, the half-truths, and the bullshit excuses. I want the truth, and I want it now. Tears welled up in her eyes as she set the phone down, her hands trembling visibly now. I didn't mean for this to happen, Mike. I swear, it just happened. Just happened? I echoed incredulously, my fists clenching under the table. You don't accidentally end up in a hotel with another man, Rachel. You don't accidentally kiss him like that. So don't give me that it just happened crap. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked away, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. I've been so unhappy, Mike, for so long. I stared at her, the anger slowly giving way to something colder, harder. Unhappy? So this is my fault? You're unhappy, so you cheat on me? It's not like that, she sobbed, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I said flatly. So what now, Rachel? Where do we go from here? She sank into the chair opposite me, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, the only sound in the room was her quiet sobbing. I wanted to feel sorry for her, to reach out and comfort her, but I couldn't. All I felt was a numbness that spread through my entire body, shutting down any sympathy I might have had. Finally, she lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said coldly. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. You've been sleeping with another man behind my back. Sorry isn't enough. She nodded, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. I know. I know it's not enough. I don't know what to do. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell me everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I want to know how long this has been going on, who he is, and what you've been doing with him. All of it. Rachel wiped her eyes, her breath hitching as she tried to compose herself. His name is Mark, she said quietly. We met at a work event a few months ago. It started off innocent, just talking, texting. But then, it became more. More? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. How much more? She flinched, her eyes darting to the side as if she couldn't bear to look at me. We've been meeting up. Mostly at his place, sometimes at hotels. I know it's wrong, Mike, but I didn't know how to stop. I felt so trapped. Trapped? The word felt like a slap in the face. Trapped in what, Rachel? In our marriage? In the life we built together? She nodded miserably. I don't know when it started, but I felt like I was suffocating. Like I wasn't living my own life anymore. Your own life? I said, my voice rising again. What about our life? The life we've spent the last 10 years building? Does that mean nothing to you? It does, Mike. It does mean something, she cried. But I don't know who I am anymore. Who you are? I was practically shouting now. You're my wife, Rachel. Or at least, you were. Now, I don't even know what you are. She buried her face in her hands again, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I sat there, staring at her, feeling more lost and confused than I ever had in my life. This woman, the one I had loved and trusted for so long, was a stranger to me now. Someone who had been living a double life, lying to my face while she snuck around with another man. I didn't know what to do, what to say. A part of me wanted to pack my bags and leave, to walk out and never look back. But another part, a small part, still wanted to fight for what we had, for the life we had built together. I had no idea which part was stronger. After what felt like an eternity, Rachel finally lifted her head, her tear-streaked face a mask of misery. I know I've destroyed everything, she whispered. But I love you, Mike. I do. And I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. But as much as I wanted to believe her, to take her in my arms and pretend none of this had happened, I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Rachel. I don't know if we can ever be what we were. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. I'll prove to you that I'm sorry. That I love you. Just, don't leave me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up from the table, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I needed to clear my head, to think about everything that had just happened. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Rachel behind, still crying at the table. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit me like a slap to the face, waking me up from the nightmare I had been living in. I had no idea what the future held, whether our marriage could survive this or if it was already too late. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to make any rash decisions. Not now. Not when everything was so raw. I didn't say anything about divorce. I wasn't ready to run away. Not yet. But the question hung in the back of my mind, unanswered, as I walked down the street, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. After the confrontation, Rachel and I fell into a strained silence, each of us walking on eggshells around the other. She tried to carry on as if everything could somehow go back to normal, making small talk, cooking dinner, even attempting to initiate intimacy a couple of times. But every touch, every word, felt hollow. The betrayal hung between us like a dark cloud, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the images of her with Mark from my mind. I found myself withdrawing more and more, spending long hours away from home, taking on extra work just to avoid being in the same room with her. When I was home, I locked myself in the spare bedroom, using the excuse that I needed space to think. The truth was, I couldn't stand to sleep in the same bed where we had shared our lives, knowing what she had done. Rachel kept apologizing, kept promising that she'd do whatever it took to fix things, but I was beyond caring about her apologies. Each time she said she was sorry, it felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of how deep her betrayal had gone. My trust in her was shattered, and every time I looked at her, all I could see was a stranger, a woman who had lied to me, cheated on me, and expected me to just forgive and forget. But I wasn't about to forgive, and I sure as hell wasn't going to forget. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to do something that would make her feel just a fraction of the pain she had caused me. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who just sat there and took it, who let his wife walk all over him while she carried on with her affair. No, I was going to show her that actions have consequences. The first thing I did was stop responding to her attempts at reconciliation. Whenever she tried to talk to me about fixing our marriage, I shut her down with cold, one-word answers. I could see the frustration building in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the sting of rejection, to understand that she couldn't just waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. I wanted her to know that she had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Then I started making my own plans, ones that she had no idea about. I wasn't going to file for divorce, at least, not yet. Instead, I decided to hit her where it hurt the most, her reputation. Rachel had always prided herself on being seen as the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect professional. She was well liked at work, admired by her peers, and respected in our social circle. She had worked hard to cultivate that image, and I knew that tearing it down would be the most effective way to make her feel the consequences of her actions. The first step was gathering evidence. The photos I had taken outside the hotel were a good start, but I needed more. I began going through her phone when she wasn't looking, reading through her messages, emails, anything I could find that would prove her infidelity beyond a shadow of a doubt. It was a painful process, seeing the explicit messages she had exchanged with Mark, the plans they had made to meet up, the way she had lied to me so easily, so frequently. But it was necessary. The more I found, the more determined I became to make her pay. Once I had enough evidence, I started dropping hints to our mutual friends, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Rachel's character. I didn't come right out and accuse her of anything that would have been too obvious. Instead, I made offhand comments about how distant she had been lately, how I was worried about the state of our marriage. I mentioned seeing her with Mark a few times, always phrasing it in a way that made it seem like I was just concerned, not suspicious. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the doubts forming, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the rumors started to spread. Rachel had no idea what I was doing behind the scenes. She was too focused on trying to win me back, to prove that she was still the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But I wasn't interested in her apologies or her promises. I was interested in making sure that she felt the full weight of her betrayal. My next move was to contact her boss. I knew that she and Mark worked together, and I figured that her superiors would be interested to know that one of their top employees was carrying on an affair with a colleague. I didn't want her to lose her job, I wasn't that cruel, but I wanted to make sure that she felt the consequences at work, where she couldn't hide behind her facade of professionalism. I drafted an anonymous email, attaching the most damning of the photos and screenshots I had collected. I kept the message short and to the point, explaining that I was a concerned third party who had recently discovered the affair and thought it was something the company should be aware of. I knew that Rachel's boss would take it seriously. He was known for being strict about maintaining a professional environment, and an affair between two employees was definitely not something he would overlook. A few days later, Rachel came home looking pale and shaken. She didn't say anything to me, but I could tell that something had happened at work. She spent the evening in silence, barely touching her dinner, her mind clearly elsewhere. I didn't ask her about it, didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that I cared. I just watched, satisfied that my plan was working. Over the next week, the tension between us grew even thicker. Rachel was walking on eggshells, her attempts at reconciliation growing more desperate as she realized that I wasn't going to forgive her so easily. She started asking me what she could do to make things right, pleading with me to at least talk to her about what had happened. But I remained cold, distant, refusing to give her any indication of what I was planning. The rumors I had planted were beginning to take root. I started hearing whispers from our friends, picking up on the subtle changes in their behavior around Rachel. They were more reserved, more cautious in their interactions with her, as if they weren't sure what to believe. It was exactly what I had wanted: to isolate her, to make her feel the weight of her actions bearing down on her from all sides. Then came the final blow. I decided to confront Mark directly, but not in a way he would expect. I didn't want a physical altercation. I wasn't interested in getting myself into trouble. Instead, I decided to use the same tactic I had used with Rachel. I would hit him where it hurt the most. Mark was married too, and from what I had gathered, he had a pretty cushy life. He and his wife had a couple of kids, lived in a nice house, and were the picture-perfect family to anyone who didn't know better. I figured that his wife had no idea about the affair, and I decided it was time to change that. I gathered up all the evidence I had on him, the photos, the messages, the emails, and put together a package that detailed his affair with Rachel. I didn't include my name or any identifying information. I didn't want this to come back to me. I just wanted to make sure that Mark's life was as miserable as mine had become. Then, one evening, I drove to his house, parked a few blocks away, and dropped the package in his mailbox. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction that made me feel good about myself, but it was something. I was finally taking control of the situation, making sure that Rachel and Mark both faced the consequences of their actions. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me in the living room, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me with those pleading eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Mike, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm begging you. Talk to me. Tell me what I can do to fix this." I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me. And then, in a voice as cold as ice, I said, "There's nothing you can do, Rachel. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." She broke down in sobs, collapsing onto the couch, but I didn't move to comfort her. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to cry alone. Revenge didn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. But it did give me a sense of control, a way to regain some of the power that Rachel had taken from me. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't ready to leave. I was in limbo, waiting to see what the fallout from my actions would be. And as I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I wondered if this was just the beginning of a long, dark road that neither of us could ever come back from. A week passed, and the tension between Rachel and me grew even thicker. Every interaction felt like walking on broken glass, sharp and painful, but necessary to keep moving forward. She was still trying, still pleading with me to forgive her, to let her prove she could make things right. But I was beyond that. My mind was fixated on Mark, the man who had crossed a line he had no business crossing, the man who thought he could take what was mine and get away with it. After delivering the package to Mark's wife, I expected things to unravel quickly for him. But to my frustration, there was no immediate fallout. Rachel didn't mention anything about trouble at work or about Mark being in hot water. I kept my ears open, waiting for a sign that my actions had caused the destruction I intended, but nothing came. It was as if the universe was mocking me, withholding the satisfaction of seeing Mark suffer. I wasn't one to back down easily, though. If I had learned anything from this whole nightmare, it was that sometimes you had to push a little harder to get the results you wanted. So I decided to escalate things. If Mark was going to keep his dirty little secret hidden, I'd make sure it came out in the open for everyone to see. I started by finding out more about Mark's life. It wasn't hard, social media was a goldmine of information. His Facebook profile was public, filled with photos of his perfect family, his 2 young kids, and his wife, a woman who had no idea what kind of man she was married to. The more I learned, the more I realized just how much Mark had to lose. He was deeply entrenched in his community, a regular at his local church, involved in his kids' school activities. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, and I was about to tear it all down. I created a burner account, a fake profile with no connection to me, and began posting anonymously on various local forums and social media pages where Mark and his wife were active. I didn't go into too much detail at first, just enough to raise some eyebrows, to get people talking. I hinted at an affair, mentioning that it involved someone from his work, but I didn't name names. I wanted to create a buzz, to stir up the pot, and then sit back and watch as the rumors spread like wildfire. It didn't take long for the gossip to start. I could see the posts multiplying, people speculating, trying to piece together the puzzle. And then, I dropped the bombshell. I posted a few of the photos I had taken, along with some choice screenshots of messages between Mark and Rachel. I made sure to blur out their faces just enough to keep things anonymous, at least for the moment. I wanted to give Mark a chance to feel the pressure, to watch as his perfect world started to crumble around him. The reaction was immediate. The posts exploded with comments, people connecting the dots, trying to figure out who the two people in the photos were. Some guessed right away, others were more cautious, but it was clear that the damage was done. Mark's name was out there, linked to the scandal, and there was no taking it back. That evening, when Rachel came home from work, I could tell something was off. She was pale, her hands trembling as she tried to keep up a facade of normalcy. But it was no use, she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Did something happen at work? I asked casually, knowing full well what had gone down. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. There were rumors going around today. About Mark and someone from the office. Rumors? I raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. What kind of rumors? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. About an affair. Someone posted photos online, and everyone's talking about it. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. And how does that affect you? Rachel's eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. Mike, I swear, I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea someone was watching us. Watching you? I cut her off, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So it is you and Mark in those photos? She cringed, realizing her mistake. It's not like that. I mean, yes, it's us, but it's not what you think. Save it, I snapped, the anger bubbling up inside me again. I'm tired of your lies, Rachel. I'm tired of you trying to twist things to make yourself look like the victim. Her lip quivered as she tried to hold back tears. I didn't want this to happen, Mike. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, you did, I said coldly. And now you're going to face the consequences. She stared at me, confused. What do you mean? You'll see, I replied, my voice flat. You'll see soon enough. The next day, the storm hit. The posts on social media had gone viral, and Mark's wife had finally seen them. From what I could gather, she had confronted him, and things had gone downhill fast. Mark was put on leave at work, pending an investigation into his conduct, and his wife had kicked him out of the house. The rumors were all over the place now, people whispering behind his back, pointing fingers, speculating about the details of the affair. Mark's carefully constructed life was unraveling at the seams, and I couldn't have been more pleased. But I wasn't done yet. Mark might have been feeling the heat, but I wanted to turn up the temperature. I decided to pay him a visit, to let him know exactly who was behind his sudden downfall. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized that the man he had betrayed was the one pulling the strings. I found out where he was staying, a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, far from the pristine suburban neighborhood he had called home. I drove there that evening, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and anger. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I saw him, but I knew I needed to face him, to confront him directly. When I arrived, the motel was as grim as I expected, flickering neon lights, a rundown parking lot, and a general air of despair. I spotted Mark's car parked near the entrance, and I pulled up beside it, taking a deep breath to steady myself. This was it. Time to put an end to this once and for all. I walked up to the door of his room, my steps deliberate and heavy. I could hear the faint sound of a TV inside, and the shadows of someone moving around. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the still night air. For a moment, there was silence, and then the door creaked open. Mark stood there, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of a few days. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and his clothes rumpled as if he hadn't bothered to change in days. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock, and he took a step back. "You," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, me," I replied, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. He backed away, his hands trembling. "What are you doing here?" I closed the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. "Just wanted to have a little chat," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Mark looked around nervously, as if searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Listen, Mike, Shut up," I snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to explain. I know exactly what you did, and I'm here to make sure you understand what happens when you mess with another man's wife." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the side as if he was trying to think of a way out of this. But there was none. I wasn't here to negotiate or listen to his excuses. I was here to make him suffer. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he stammered, his voice shaking. "It just got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You think cheating on your wife and ruining my marriage is something that just gets out of hand?" He flinched at the harshness of my tone, but I didn't care. I was done playing nice. "You think you can just waltz into my life, take what's mine, and walk away without any consequences? You think you're going to get away with this?" He shook his head, his eyes pleading. "No, I swear, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You're sorry?" I interrupted, my voice dripping with disdain. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Mark. Not anymore." He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, my fists clenched at my sides. "You ruined my life, Mark. You took everything I cared about and destroyed it. And now, I'm going to make sure you feel the same pain." He backed away, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, Mike, don't." But I didn't listen. I grabbed him by the collar, shoving him against the wall, my face inches from his. "You're going to lose everything, Mark," I hissed. "Your job, your family, your reputation. Everything you've built is going to come crashing down, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." He tried to push me away, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage that had been building for weeks. "You think you're some kind of big shot, don't you? Think you can have whatever you want, whenever you want? Well, guess what, you're nothing. You're a pathetic little man who can't keep his hands to himself, and now you're going to pay the price." I released him, watching as he crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath. "You're finished, Mark. And when you're lying in the gutter, with nothing left, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember the day you fucked with the wrong man." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. "Please, don't." But I was done with him. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, a final punctuation mark on the destruction of his life. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction that made me feel good, but it was something. I had taken control of the situation, made sure that Mark paid for what he had done. And as I drove away from the motel, I couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in weeks, I was finally free. But that freedom came at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. Because while Mark's life was in ruins, so was mine. I had gotten my revenge, but it hadn't erased the pain. It hadn't brought back the trust, the love, the life I had lost. And as I pulled into my driveway, the house looming before me like a shadow of the life I once knew, I realized that the hardest part was still ahead. Because revenge might have felt good in the moment, but it hadn't healed the wounds. It hadn't made the pain go away. And now, I had to figure out how to live with the consequences of what I had done. The following days passed in a blur of tension and silence. I could tell Rachel knew something had happened, something more than just the rumors at work. She didn't ask me outright, but I could see it in the way she watched me, her eyes constantly searching mine for some sign of what I was thinking, of what I was planning to do next. She had been walking on eggshells ever since the confrontation, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it was clear that the cracks in our marriage were widening by the day. As for me, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, mentally. The revenge I had taken on Mark had given me a fleeting sense of control, but in the end, it had only left me feeling emptier than before. The satisfaction I had expected never came. Instead, there was just this gnawing emptiness, a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. And in that void, one thought kept circling in my mind, relentless and inescapable: divorce. It was inevitable. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that there might be a way to salvage our marriage, I knew, deep down, that it was over. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. You know, when you hit your 40s, you think you've seen enough of life to not be surprised by much. I'm Mike, by the way, 40 years old, and I thought I had it all figured out, a stable job, 2 wonderful kids, and a wife, Rachel, who I've been with for 10 years. Sure, life threw the usual curveballs, but nothing too crazy. I wasn't expecting the bombshell that was about to drop into my seemingly comfortable life. Rachel, my wife, was 3 years older than me, but that was never an issue. If anything, her maturity was something I admired. She had this way of making life seem effortless, balancing work and home like a pro. She was the breadwinner in our family, which suited me just fine since I worked from home and took care of the kids. I did most of the cooking, cleaning, and school runs while Rachel tackled the corporate world. I never felt emasculated by it. In fact, I was proud of the way we managed our lives. It wasn't the typical setup, but it worked for us. Or so I thought. Lately, though, something had shifted. Rachel, once so open and warm, had grown distant. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things, coming home late, spending more time on her phone, and being unusually secretive about her plans. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. She had been promoted last year, and with that came more responsibility, more pressure. I understood that. But it was more than just stress. There was a coldness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, like she was miles away even when she was sitting right next to me. Our sex life, once frequent and passionate, had dwindled to almost nothing. When I tried to initiate, she'd either make an excuse or, worse, go through the motions without any enthusiasm. It felt like I was being pitted rather than desired. I found myself questioning everything. Was it me? Had I let myself go? Was I not enough anymore? The doubts ate away at me, but every time I tried to bring it up, Rachel would dismiss my concerns with a wave of her hand, accusing me of being paranoid or insecure. "You're overthinking it, Mike," she'd say. "I'm just tired." Tired. That was the word she used every time I tried to talk about what was bothering her. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me rest. I started noticing other things. She'd spend hours getting ready before going out, even if it was just to run errands. Her wardrobe started changing too. She began wearing clothes I hadn't seen her buy, more revealing than usual. And then there was her phone, which seemed glued to her hand at all times. If I even glanced at it, she'd quickly lock the screen or tuck it away. One night, she said she was going out to buy some things for the house. It was odd because Rachel hated shopping. And yet, there she was, all dolled up as if she was going on a date rather than a quick trip to the store. My suspicions grew, but I stayed silent. When she got home late that night, she was evasive, brushing off my questions about where she had been and who she was with. The only detail she offered was that she had been with a friend named Mark, a name I vaguely remembered seeing in her texts. It's not like I'd ever been the jealous type. I trusted Rachel. I didn't care that she had male friends. Hell, some of my best friends were women. But something about this didn't sit right. It was the way she said his name, with an edge of familiarity that made my skin crawl. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but they kept coming back, stronger each time. A couple of weeks went by, and things didn't improve. Rachel grew more distant, more hostile even. She started picking fights over the smallest things, how I cooked dinner, the way I folded the laundry, or how I helped the kids with their homework. It was like she was looking for an excuse to be angry with me. Our house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a battlefield, and I was losing ground fast. Then came the night when everything changed. Rachel was getting ready to go out again, and I couldn't take it anymore. As she stood in front of the mirror, applying the final touches to her makeup, I noticed she was wearing the lingerie I bought her last year for our anniversary. Lingerie that, as far as I knew, she hadn't worn for me since then. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was dressing up for someone else. I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I waited until she left, my mind racing with possibilities. I was desperate to know what was really going on, but I was also terrified of what I might find. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, my thoughts spiraling into darker and darker places. When she finally came home, it was late, and she looked disheveled, like she had been caught in a windstorm. I asked her where she had been, and she snapped at me, saying she didn't owe me an explanation. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the truth that I had been trying so hard to avoid became impossible to ignore. My wife was cheating on me. I could feel it in my bones. The woman I had spent the last decade of my life with, the mother of my children, was betraying me in the worst way possible. And the worst part? She didn't seem to care if I knew. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, to make her admit what she had done. But a part of me wasn't ready to face it. I needed to know more before I could take the next step, before I could rip our lives apart. So, I waited. I watched. And I planned. Because if there's one thing I've learned from years of being the guy who keeps the house running smoothly, it's that patience is a virtue. But patience also has its limits, and mine was about to snap. What was supposed to be a simple life had turned into a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the unease that had settled deep in my gut. Rachel was up early, bustling around the house with an energy that felt almost manic. She avoided eye contact, her mood swinging between forced cheerfulness and irritation at the smallest things. She was a live wire, ready to snap, and it took everything in me to stay calm, to keep my suspicions hidden. But beneath the surface, my mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that had started to show its ugly picture. I needed answers. I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine while my life crumbled around me. So, I decided to take action. That evening, after dinner, Rachel mentioned she was heading out again, another errand that would no doubt take her hours. She didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask. I simply nodded, playing the role of the oblivious husband, and watched as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and keys and followed. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't sit at home any longer, waiting for her to come back with more lies. I tailed her car from a distance, careful not to get too close. My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I navigated the streets, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. Rachel drove across town to a part of the city we rarely visited. It was an area with upscale restaurants, boutique shops, and fancy hotels, definitely not the kind of place you'd go for a quick errand. My suspicions deepened as she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel I recognized from a couple of work events. It was one of those sleek, modern places that catered to business travelers and out-of-town guests. I parked my car a block away, in a spot where I could see the hotel entrance without being seen. For what felt like an eternity, I waited, my eyes glued to the entrance. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one ticking by with agonizing slowness. Then, finally, I saw her. Rachel emerged from her car, looking more put together than I'd seen her in weeks. She was dressed to kill, in a tight dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. My heart sank as I watched her walk towards the entrance, scanning the area as if checking to make sure she wasn't being watched. She had no idea I was there, watching her every move. A few moments later, a man appeared from the hotel lobby. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded a confidence that made my skin crawl. As he stepped out into the evening light, Rachel's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She walked straight up to him, and before I could fully process what was happening, they embraced. It wasn't a friendly hug, either. It was the kind of embrace that made my blood boil, their bodies pressed close together as if they couldn't stand the distance between them. Then, to my utter disbelief, they kissed. Not a quick peck, not a friendly kiss on the cheek, this was a full-on, passionate kiss, the kind that spoke volumes about what had been going on behind my back. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I felt the blood drain from my face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, everything I knew crumbling around me in that single moment. I knew I needed proof, something solid to confront her with. So, with trembling hands, I reached for my phone and started snapping pictures. Each click of the camera felt like a stab to my heart, but I couldn't stop. I took shot after shot, capturing every sickening detail, the way she wrapped her arms around him, the way he caressed her face, the way they looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. After a few minutes that felt like a lifetime, they broke apart, their lips still inches from each other as they exchanged a few words. Then, hand in hand, they walked into the hotel, disappearing from my sight. I stayed in the car, my mind racing, my body frozen. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, was cheating on me right in front of my eyes, and she didn't even care enough to hide it properly. I don't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the hotel entrance, but eventually, I forced myself to move. My first instinct was to storm into the hotel, confront them right then and there, and demand answers. But as much as I wanted to unleash my fury, I knew that wasn't the way to handle this. I needed to be smart, to plan my next move carefully. I needed to confront Rachel, but not here, not in front of strangers where she could deny everything or make a scene. I needed to do it on my terms, where she couldn't escape the truth. So, with my heart in pieces and my stomach churning, I started the car and drove home. The drive was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mess of anger, pain, and disbelief. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before me like a tomb, cold, dark, and empty. The place that had once been a sanctuary, a home filled with love and laughter, now felt like a prison. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the photos on my phone. Each image was a dagger, a reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. I scrolled through them slowly, over and over, as if trying to convince myself that this was real, that this nightmare wasn't just a figment of my imagination. But the proof was undeniable. The pictures were clear, damning evidence that Rachel had been living a double life, hiding secrets that had shattered the foundation of our marriage. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I had to confront her, to lay it all out on the table and demand the truth. But first, I needed to prepare myself for what was to come. This wasn't going to be easy, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me: lies, excuses, maybe even tears. But I was done being played for a fool. I was done letting her walk all over me while she carried on with her affair. As I sat there, my resolve hardened. This was it. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. Tomorrow, when she came home, I would confront her with the evidence, and I wouldn't back down until I had all the answers. It was time for Rachel to face the consequences of her actions. She had betrayed me, and now she was going to pay the price. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that kiss. Rachel, my wife of 10 years, locking lips with another man like I didn't even exist. The images played over and over in my mind, each one a fresh stab of pain that made my blood boil. But the anger wasn't as overwhelming as I thought it would be. It was there, sure, simmering beneath the surface, but what I felt more than anything was a hollow emptiness, a void that had opened up inside me the moment I realized just how deep her betrayal went. When morning came, I was running on fumes. Rachel hadn't come home yet, and the house was eerily quiet. The kids were staying with my parents for the weekend, so it was just me, alone with my thoughts, waiting for her to walk through that door. I had no idea what I was going to say when she did, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to mention divorce. Not yet, anyway. As much as the thought of ending our marriage had crossed my mind, I wasn't ready to make that call. Not without hearing her side of the story, no matter how twisted or dishonest it might be. It was almost noon by the time I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the tension that had built up over the past several hours. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check as I heard the key turn in the lock and the door creak open. She walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, her expression barely registered surprise. "Mike," she said, her voice carrying a strange mix of nonchalance and exhaustion. "You're up early." I didn't respond immediately. I just watched her, taking in every detail: the smudged mascara under her eyes, the slightly disheveled hair, the way she avoided looking directly at me. She moved to put down her purse, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd even bother explaining where she'd been. But I didn't have to wait long. "I stayed with Karen last night," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I didn't want to drive home so late, and I knew the kids were with your parents, so—" Her voice trailed off, and finally, she met my gaze. I could see the flicker of something, guilt, maybe in her eyes, but she covered it quickly, masking it with a tired smile. "I'm sorry I didn't call." "You stayed with Karen?" I repeated, my tone flat, betraying nothing of the turmoil inside me. "Yes," she nodded, walking over to the counter to make herself a cup of coffee. She's been having a rough time, and I figured it was better to just stay over. I watched her carefully, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. She was lying, of course she was. But the ease with which she did it, the way she slipped into that role of the caring friend, made my stomach turn. "You don't smell like you've been at Karen's," I said quietly, my eyes never leaving her. Rachel froze for a split second, the coffee pot hovering just above her mug. It was a small detail, but I caught it, that brief hesitation before she continued as if nothing had happened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice light but with an edge of defensiveness. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "I mean, you smell like cheap hotel soap, not Karen's place." She turned to face me, the mug of coffee forgotten on the counter. "Are you accusing me of something, Mike?" Her voice had that sharp, brittle quality to it, the one she used when she felt cornered. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and slid it across the table toward her. "Why don't you take a look?" Rachel's eyes flicked to the phone, her brows furrowing in confusion. Slowly, she walked over, picked it up, and stared at the screen. I watched as her face drained of color, her eyes widening in horror as she swiped through the photos I had taken the night before. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling now, the bravado slipping away. "You tell me," I replied, keeping my tone as steady as I could manage. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've got a lot of explaining to do." She stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, struggling to find the right words. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. "Then what is it, Rachel? What exactly is going on here?" My voice rose, unable to keep the anger at bay any longer. "Because I'm tired of the lies, the half-truths, and the bullshit excuses. I want the truth, and I want it now." Tears welled up in her eyes as she set the phone down, her hands trembling visibly now. I didn't mean for this to happen, Mike. I swear, it just happened."